We might find out some more information from the investigation that's now being undertaken.
There will be another news conference this evening. There's going to be a meeting of the various agencies involved, which includes the National Transportation Safety Board, Amtrak, Conrail, the local authorities, union officials, that type of thing. There will be a meeting this evening, and then after that there will be another meeting with the press. That should occur in the 8:30 to 9 p.m. Eastern time range.
Okay, Bob, thank you. CNN's Bob Franken live on the phone, who has just emerged from a news conference held by the National Transportation and Safety Board, who have launched an investigation into the crash. Jeff Weiser is now with us from New York. Jeff?
Don, the Amtrak accident is forcing between 10 and 15,000 travelers to find other ways of getting around.
Twisted steel hid bodies and clues from investigators who were searching the scene of this nation's worst train wreck in years. There are now 15 confirmed deaths in the crash yesterday of the Amtrak Colonial near Baltimore, and close to 200 people are nursing injuries. We have team coverage of the wreck and what caused it, beginning now with Channel 2's Mary Murphy on the scene in Maryland.
Rescue workers dug through the pile of twisted metal all night, searching for signs of life, a voice, from beneath the wreckage of the Amtrak Colonial. This morning, they were still digging.
Our concern and our priority is the victims' families of this tragedy. But we're notifying next of kin, which becomes our most important element.
At 12 nearby hospitals, survivors of the holiday weekend crash were still in shock. Fred Brown of Montclair, New Jersey, sat in one Maryland hospital bed with a dislocated shoulder, but at least he was alive.
I feel lucky now. Very lucky.
Thank you.
And I've thanked him upstairs for sparing our lives.
Ronald Gary of the Bronx suffered leg injuries, but he saved a child in the process.
He came flying towards me, so I grabbed him and embraced him like this. He was, screaming. He wasn't crying, but he was screaming. I told him to relax, be calm, everything will be all right.
Hundreds of passengers were on board the Amtrak Colonial when it left Washington, D.C. at 12:30 yesterday afternoon. An hour later, it would smash into 3 Conrail locomotives in Chase, Maryland. Investigators believe the Conrail engines ran a stop signal, getting onto Amtrak's main line, seconds before the 12-car passenger train came speeding around a curve at about 100 miles an hour. The force of the crash squeezed passenger cars together like an accordion. One car was totally crushed by another, and rescue workers had still not reached some of the victims this afternoon. A temporary morgue was set up at the site, while officials from the National Transportation Safety Board converged on the scene early today.
The Conrail pulse event recorders that were on the 3 diesel engines have been recovered. They are apparently in good enough condition that will yield data that will help us.
This was the worst train crash in the United States since 1972, when 45 people were killed in Chicago in a train accident. It is Amtrak's worst since the line went into business almost 16 years ago. Now, in the wake of this tragedy, some Amtrak employees are claiming there have always been safety problems along Amtrak's northeastern corridor. In Chase, Maryland, Mary Murphy, Channel 2 News.
I'm Neil Rosenau at Penn Station, where survivors of the Amtrak crash finally reached their destination by bus early this morning with tales to tell the waiting cameras.
We could actually feel the brakes go on in a terrible jolt. I mean, the train was completely derailed.
We got out. I was lucky. I was in a car that was sitting upright, and other people weren't so lucky.
Believe me, that's how I did it when I got a hold of them.
Today at Penn Station, the effects of the wreck were still being felt. Long delays on trains arriving from the south, and 27 daily Metroliner runs to and from Washington.
All canceled. Metroliners, due to the fact that we're not running any service between Philadelphia and Washington.
We're on vacation and we don't want to sit around the train station all day. Got any suggestions?
Zenia, do you make an announcement they should all get their tickets? I don't think they know that.
That's right, folks. Even the United States Senator had to find another way to get to Washington. Al D'Amato had hired a special 5-car train to take him and 350 family, friends, and supporters to his second-term inauguration tomorrow. The train was canceled.
That'll take away from some of the spirit of bringing everyone together. You know, that's the nice kind of thing.
So they went to Plan B. B for bus. Republicans weren't the only ones with this problem. Supporters of Queens Democratic Congressman Tom Manton also got off the track and on the road.
A lot of folks said it was a little bit safer than flying, and sadly the events of yesterday showed that it isn't quite as safe as people think it is sometimes.
Fact is, statistics show planes and trains about equally safe, much safer than cars. This is the worst accident in Amtrak's 15-year history. Far worse, for instance, than the head-on crash of 2 Amtrak trains in Queens in 1984 when 1 person was killed.
The Metroliner to Washington will get back on track. Other trains will be back on schedule, but today's passengers will live with the frustration, and the Amtrak system will live with an ugly scar on its record. At Penn Station, I'm Neil Rosenau, Channel 2 News.
Baltimore, the accident occurred when an Amtrak passenger train and a Conrail freight collided at high speed, but so far, investigators can't figure out why it happened. CBS News correspondent Eric Engberg has that.
So powerful had been the impact that parts of the 2 trains appeared fused together as rescue teams pressed the search this morning for both survivors and bodies. They had worked through the night using torches, cranes, and other heavy equipment to separate cars and locomotives, moving slowly out of concern that injured passengers might be tangled in the wreckage. The Amtrak train, the Colonial, originating in Washington and bound for Boston, carried 12 cars and 500 passengers. The second train consisted of 3 linked locomotives with only 2 crewmen on board. By midday today, the searchers had dug down to the bottom car.
There is no sign of life left in the cars. From all indications, there is no sign of life.
Of the more than 170 passengers taken to hospitals for treatment, many were still dazed.
The initial jolt or initial crash, some of the subsequent crashes with the train behind coming into our car, but seeing the flames and smoke, then the next thing I know, I was really outside.
You could hear people hollering. But with my shoulder, I couldn't do nothing for them, you know.
Federal investigators from the National Transportation Safety Board took charge of the hunt for a cause.
The first and primary focal will be that of the track itself and the signal system that's operating in this particular area.
The signals, which the trains would have passed through just before the accident, control train movements at a point where 4 tracks merge into 2. The Conrail locomotives, for some reason, pulled onto the same section of track that the passenger train was approaching at 100 miles per hour, the engines colliding with such force that they folded over each other. For the first time in the history of rail accidents, both trains were equipped with black boxes, data recorders like this one, that register speed and other technical information that may provide clues to the cause. The 2 trains also carried 2-way radio equipment, and investigators will review tapes to see if the engineers talked to each other before the accident. The engineer of the passenger train was killed. The other engineer walked away from the accident. The safety board has ordered drug and alcohol tests for both train crews as it begins trying to determine whether human error, equipment failure, or some combination of the 2 was responsible for the worst accident in the history of Amtrak. Eric Engberg, CBS News, Chase, Maryland.
It happened 7 miles east of Baltimore yesterday when an Amtrak passenger train slammed into a 3-car Conrail freight train that may have gone through a stop signal. The passenger train was traveling at 90 miles an hour, and the collision piled 3 cars of the train on top of each other. There were more than 500 passengers on the Washington to Boston train at the time. Rescue workers toiled through the night and into the morning to remove bodies and passengers trapped in the wreckage. Most of the dead were in the top car of the pileup. The Amtrak engineer was also killed, but the engineer operating the Conrail freight train walked away from the crash. His brakeman suffered a broken leg. Late today, safety investigators said they were still searching for the recorders in the Amtrak engine, which could indicate what caused the accident.
The only thing I can tell you at this point, because we know very little, is that the Amtrak train had the right-of-way, that the Conrail train had all systems function properly, and had their orders been obeyed, should have remained on the siding and not proceeded out into the main track. We are looking to see whether the signal...
Next, the train wreck near Baltimore yesterday afternoon. 15 persons died in the tragedy when a northbound Amtrak passenger train, the Colonial, collided into the rear of a freight train. Another 176 persons were injured. The National Transportation Safety Board has begun an investigation into the cause of the accident. Late this afternoon, Joseph Nall, an NTSB member, held a news conference.
We have begun to focus our investigation into various areas. The first and primary focal will be that of the track itself and the signal system that's operating in this particular area. We will also be looking at the mechanical areas of the operation, the condition of the trains themselves. We will be looking at elements of human performance and emergency response, survivability issues, that is, how the passengers fared inside the cars themselves, and finally the question of operations. In other words, how is the system being operated in the busy and high-speed northeast corridor where this accident occurred. I can tell you that we have determined that there are pulse event recorders that are on these trains. That is important because we at the NTSB have urged the railroads to use these recorders, and this is the first occasion where we've had a major accident like this where pulse recorders are used on both of the trains involved. Pulse recorders give us information not only such as speed, but also such as the braking, the throttle condition, and amperage that's being operated, and other salient information that will help us reconstruct and determine the cause of this accident.
Investigation of the crash is being conducted by the National Transportation Safety Board, but also by the Federal Railroad Commission. The head of the FRA is John Riley, who spent last night at the scene of the accident. Mr. Riley, first of all, let's talk about these pulse recorders, the black boxes. They have been found, is that correct?
There are three types of black boxes here. One on the Conrail train, one on the Amtrak train, and one on the signal system. It's a modern signal system with its own black recording box. We've recovered the box from the signal system. We've recovered the Conrail boxes. We have not recovered the Amtrak boxes as yet, but we expect to. However, with the information on the signal system black box, we should be able to reconstruct the accident.
Now, why?
What the black box tells us is the speed with which both trains approached the crossing point. It will tell us if the signal functioned properly. It will tell us what aspect of the signal each train received. And it will tell us exactly what the moment of impact was. In other words, that black box will tell us everything we need to know to make the key threshold determination. Did the signal system work?
All right, and what we're talking about here is the fact that the Conrail train should not have been where it was. Is that right?
That's absolutely right. The Amtrak train had the right-of-way. It was where it was supposed to be. The Conrail train should have been told by the signal system to stay on the siding, and it should have stayed there. That narrows you down to two possible causes. One is signal system function, and we are testing the signal system now. The second is human performance, a crew that simply ran the signal system. And we ultimately will know the answer, because this is a very new signal system, a very modern one, and the event recorder on the signal system will tell us with certainty what aspect, in other words, what color signal.
One of those two answers, is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Well, you say ultimately. When is ultimately? Tomorrow? A month from tomorrow? When?
We are now deciphering the black box information. As to testing the signal system, we began to test it today. We can't complete that testing until the wreckage is removed from the site. And I say it will take us about 2 days after the wreckage is finally removed to complete the testing. And we intend to complete it without delay.
Does it look like, based on what's happened so far, what testing you've done so far, that signal was working?
I really can't conjecture because we've performed only about a quarter of the tests that we ultimately will perform on the signal. Now, it's past that quarter of the tests, but of course there are many, many more to go. So it would really be conjecture to talk about it now.
Well, one thing, of course, that would not be conjecture is what the engineer on the Conrail train said. What has he said about signals and what he did and did not do?
The engineer has been interviewed. I have not received a copy of the statement yet, although I expect to. We have, however, taken toxicological tests of the engineer and the Conrail crew, and those tests have been sent to Oklahoma City for analysis. So what we're doing is touching the key bases. The signal system is being analyzed, and that answers the threshold question. We've taken toxicological tests of the crew, and the crew is now being interviewed by NTSB and FRA investigators. And this is an accident where we will know the answer.
We'll know the answer.
We will know the answer.
You can't tell us in any way what the engineer and what the crew say about what happened?
I can't yet because the interviewing process isn't complete, and I just wouldn't want to talk to you based on partial discussions. I don't think that's fair.
All right, on the Amtrak train, now the engineer was killed. What about other key crew members? Are they alive, and are they being interviewed?
We have 15 fatalities. We have been able to confirm the identity of 8. So I can't answer that question with certainty, but we will interview all surviving crew members, and we'll interview as many of the passengers as we can. That's part of the interviewing process. I think one of the ways that we've been able to cut the accident rate in this industry in half in the last 5 years is by doing those kinds of interviews, getting the data, and then acting on it, and we're going to do the same thing in this accident.
Okay. Back to just